So we have introduced in this lecture one of the most important concepts that we will see in this first half of the class, which is the concept of comparative advantage, which, as we've seen, is related to being able to produce a good for relatively cheaper compared to other countries. We will analyze in detail in the next lecture how countries can be able to produce for a relatively cheaper price a certain good. For now, let's just think about the general concept of being relatively more efficient. So if I have a relatively lower cost of producing one good, I'm likely going to be able to sell it for a relatively lower price. And let's reflect on the idea that if I'm relatively more efficient at producing a certain good, then it's going to be convenient to purchase it from me. If I'm relatively less efficient at producing one good, then it's unlikely that the world demand will come to me to get that specific good. So we're already grasping the idea that if we're open to trade and we're relatively more efficient at producing one good, we're likely to export it. And probably when we open up to trade, we will produce more of it. This idea and this concept is known as specialization. If I'm relatively less efficient at producing one good, and so if the relative price of that good is relatively higher compared to another country or the rest of the world, then I'm likely to abandon the production of that good because, consumers will want to buy that good from the producers and from the country that is relatively more efficient at producing it and can offer it for a relatively lower price. So now we already grasping the idea that if we're open to trade, then we will specialize in the goods in which we are particularly good at production, and abandon the production of those goods where we are unable to produce at a competitive relative price. In the following lecture, in lecture 3, we will develop these concepts analytically and in detail.